My brother's hand hit the table so hard the gravy boat tipped, and I watched the brown liquid spread across the white tablecloth like a slow bruise. He didn't apologize. He never did. "Just sign it, Claire," he said. "It's one piece of paper. We could have everything settled before Christmas." My grandmother sat at the other end of the table, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on some point past my shoulder. She hadn't touched her food. She was 81 years old and her name was Dorothy, and for the past hour my brother and my parents had been talking about her house like she wasn't in the room, like she was already gone. "She's right here," I said. "Claire." My mother pressed her fingers to her temples. "Your brother is trying to help. The property taxes alone are—" "She's right here," I said again. My brother looked at me the way he'd been looking at me since we were children, with that flat, patient expression that meant he had already decided what was going to happen and was simply waiting for me to accept it. His name was Nathan. He was 3 years older than me, and he had always been their favorite, and he knew it, and he had spent 35 years making sure I never forgot it. "Mom needs the money," he said. "We all do. Grandma understands." Grandmother finally looked at him. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him for a long moment with an expression I had never seen on her face before, something tired and resolved and a little sad, and then she turned to me. "Help me to my room, sweetheart," she said quietly. I pushed back my chair and went to her. My mother said something behind us. Nathan said something back. Their voices blended into the particular sound of my childhood, which was the sound of two people deciding things that were none of their business. I helped grandmother down the hall to her room. The house smelled like it always had, like cedar and something floral and old wood, and the walls were lined with photographs that nobody else ever looked at. She walked slowly, one hand on my arm, her grip lighter than it used to be. When we reached her room, she didn't sit down. She stood in the center of the floor and looked at the large antique mirror that hung on the wall beside her dresser. It had been there my entire life. It had a dark wood frame carved with small leaves, and the glass was slightly warped in the way of very old things, and I had never once thought to wonder where it came from. "Grandmother," I said, "are you all right?" She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Close the door." I closed it. The voices from the dining room went muffled and small. She crossed to the mirror slowly and placed both palms flat against the frame, feeling along the carved edges the way a person feels for something they memorized a long time ago. Her fingers stopped at the bottom right corner, pressing into a particular groove in the wood. "Push," she said. "What?" She looked at me over her shoulder. "Push here, both hands." I came to stand beside her and pressed my palms where she showed me. For a moment, nothing happened. Then something clicked, soft and internal, and the entire back panel of the mirror frame swung inward like a tiny door. Cold air breathed out from the hollow space behind it. Inside was a manila envelope, old and soft with age, sealed with a strip of tape that had gone yellow. My heart did something strange in my chest. "Grandmother, take it," she said. I took it. It was lighter than I expected. I could feel the edges of documents inside, the slight stiffness of folded paper. She sat down on the edge of her bed and laced her fingers together in her lap. "I should have shown you this a long time ago," she said, "but I was afraid. And then I got used to being afraid. And that is its own kind of prison." I sat beside her. "What is this?" "The truth," she said. "About who I am. About who your grandfather was. About why this house is not what your brother thinks it is." She told me her name was not originally Dorothy Hale. Her name had been Dorothy Voss. She had been born in 1943 inches, a small city in Ohio, the daughter of a biochemist named Werner Voss, who had spent 20 years developing a compound that could repair damaged nerve tissue. Not treat it, not manage it, repair it. The research was quiet and methodical and revolutionary. And when she was 14 years old, a pharmaceutical company called Meridian sent men to their house who were not there to discuss a partnership. Her father had refused to sell. He had refused to license. He had believed his work belonged to patients, not to shareholders, and he had said so in letters that were still inside the envelope in my hands. 3 months later, he died in a car accident on a road he had driven every day for 15 years. She was given a new surname. She was moved to a different state. She was told to be someone else, and she had been someone else for 67 years, and the only thing she had kept from before was the mirror that had hung in her father's study, and the documents hidden inside it. I sat very still after she finished talking. The sounds of Thanksgiving dinner had gone quiet in the house. Someone had turned on the television. "Does Nathan know any of this?" I asked. "Nathan knows the house is old," she said. "He knows it's valuable. He found a notebook last year in the attic. Your grandfather's handwriting, notes about something called the Voss compound. He didn't understand what he was reading, but he understood that it was worth something to someone." She paused. "He has already made contact with Meridian." The word landed in the room like something heavy. What? "A man came to this house 2 months ago," she said, "while you were at work. He said his name was Richard Crane. He was young, maybe 40, very polished, and he said he was a researcher. He wasn't. I recognized the Meridian name on the card he left." She looked at the envelope in my hands. "Your brother invited him." "He didn't tell me until afterward. He said it was just a conversation." I thought about Nathan at the dinner table. I thought about the piece of paper he wanted me to sign, the property transfer, the casual urgency in his voice. I thought about how my mother had backed him up without asking a single question, the way she always had. "We need to leave tonight," I said. She shook her head. "Not yet. There are things I need to tell you first, about what's inside that envelope, and about what Werner believed someone would do with it one day." I wanted to argue. I wanted to grab her hand and walk straight out the front door. Instead, I opened the envelope. Inside were 4 documents. The first was a birth certificate. Dorothy Ann Voss, born the 12th of September, 1943. The name hit me with a quiet force I hadn't expected. I had known her my whole life as Dorothy Hale. The second document was a research abstract, 12 dense pages in my great-grandfather's handwriting, describing a compound he called VN7. The third was a letter dated 1971, addressed to Dorothy from a lawyer in Cincinnati who had been holding the documents in trust since Werner Voss died. The fourth was a deed. I turned the deed toward the lamp and read it twice. The house had been purchased in 1,971 inches, Dorothy Voss's legal name. Not Hale, not Bennett, Voss. Which meant that Nathan's property transfer, the paper he wanted me to sign tonight, was based on a name that had no legal claim to this property. "He doesn't know," I said. "No," Grandmother said. "He doesn't know, but Crane does. Or he suspects. That's why they want the transfer completed quickly, before anyone looks closely." A knock at the bedroom door. My mother's voice. "Mom? Claire? Dinner's getting cold." We looked at each other. "We need someone we can trust," I said quietly. Grandmother nodded slowly. "There's a woman," she said. "Margaret Osei. She was Werner's last research assistant. She's 93 years old and she still lives in Columbus, and I have spoken to her every Christmas for 40 years. She is the only other person alive who knows what VN7 was." "That's not what I meant," I said. "I meant a lawyer." My college roommate, Priya, had become a family law attorney in Philadelphia. She was the kind of person who answered texts at midnight and kept a spare key to her office because she was always forgetting her own. I texted her from Grandmother's bathroom with the water running so nobody could hear me typing. "I need help. My grandmother has a 60-year-old secret, and my brother is about to sell her house to a pharmaceutical company that killed her father. Call me." The 3 dots appeared almost immediately. "Calling now. Pick up." I stepped back into the bedroom and held up my phone. Grandmother raised her eyebrows slightly. I pressed speaker. Priya's voice was calm and immediate and exactly what I needed. I gave her the short version. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Don't sign anything. Don't let your grandmother sign anything. Don't let Nathan or your parents near those documents tonight. Can you get to a hotel?" "Not without going through the living room," I said. "Then you're staying put until I get there. I'm 3 hours away." A pause, the sound of movement. "Who else is in that house right now?" "My brother, my parents, and I think my brother may have told his friend Crane where we are." A longer pause. "Claire," she said carefully, "you said Meridian. Are you sure it was Meridian?" That was the name on the card Grandmother saw. Priya was quiet for a moment. Meridian has been involved in 4 patent theft cases in the last 15 years. 2 of them involved families who held original research documentation. In both cases, the families transferred their rights before they understood what they had. Another pause. Lock the bedroom door. I locked it. We sat on the edge of the bed for an hour, grandmother and I, with the envelope between us. She talked quietly about her father, about the compound, about what it could do. Werner Voss had believed it could treat spinal cord injuries, Parkinson's, certain types of neurological damage that current medicine could only slow. He had been careful because he was afraid of exactly what had happened. He had hidden copies of his work because he understood that men who want something badly enough will take it if they can. He used to say, grandmother said, that a discovery belongs to the person who can do the most good with it, not the person with the most money, not the person with the most lawyers. She looked at the envelope. He would have liked you, Claire. I felt something tighten in my throat. He never knew I existed. No, she said, but I have been watching you for 26 years, and I know how you fight for things that matter. You always have, even when nobody noticed. The television in the living room went quiet. Footsteps in the hall. A knock, louder this time, Nathan's voice. Claire, we need to talk. I said nothing. Claire, I know you're in there. Come on. Crane is coming by tonight just to answer some questions. Nobody's making any decisions. Just come hear him out. I looked at grandmother. She shook her head once. We're tired, I called back. We'll talk in the morning. A pause. Then my brother's voice, lower, meant for someone else. My father answering. The sound of their footsteps moving away down the hall. I pulled up the tracking app on my phone. Priya's blue dot was on the highway, moving fast. At 10 o'clock, a car turned into the driveway. Not Priya. The headlights were wrong, wider apart, and the engine sound was too smooth. I moved to the window and looked through the curtain and saw a dark gray sedan park beside my brother's truck. A man got out. He was wearing a coat that was too good for a casual Thanksgiving visit. He carried a leather briefcase. He stood for a moment in the driveway, looking at the house with an expression of calm assessment that made the back of my neck prickle. Crane, grandmother said from behind me. She had moved to stand at my shoulder without my hearing her. That's him. He was 40 or so, well-built, with the kind of careful composure that doesn't come from being calm but from practicing calm until it becomes a mask. My brother opened the front door and shook his hand. My mother appeared behind Nathan, smoothing her sweater. We need to go, I said. The back door, grandmother said. Through the kitchen. They'll see us. The kitchen window faces the backyard, she said. The fence along the back opens to the Pattersons' property. I have a key to their side gate. Margaret Patterson gave it to me years ago for emergencies. I stared at her. You planned for this. Werner planned for this, she said quietly. I just maintained the plan. I helped her put on her coat. I tucked the envelope inside my own jacket. She took a small key from the drawer of her nightstand and pressed it into my palm. Then she picked up her purse with the deliberate calm of a woman who had been ready for this moment for a very long time. The hallway was clear. The voices from the front of the house were low and conversational. Nathan explaining something. Crane responding in that smooth, unhurried way. My mother said something and laughed. I wondered if she knew what was actually happening, or if Nathan had told her just enough to make it sound reasonable, the way he always did. We moved through the kitchen quickly. The back door opened onto the yard and the cold November air came in sharp and clean. Grandmother stepped onto the back porch without hesitating. I followed, pulling the door shut behind us with the slow care of someone trying not to make a sound. The yard was dark except for the light from the kitchen window. We crossed the grass toward the fence. I kept checking over my shoulder. The kitchen window remained lit and empty. The gate key worked smoothly. We slipped through into the Pattersons' yard, and I locked it behind us. My phone buzzed. Priya. 15 minutes out. Meet me at the diner on Route 9. The one with the red sign. I knew the one. I had eaten breakfast there probably 200 times. We came out through the Pattersons' front gate onto the street, and walked 2 blocks to where I had parked my car that afternoon, down the hill from the house because Nathan's truck had been in the driveway. I helped grandmother into the passenger seat and turned the heat up immediately. Her hands were cold. Are you all right? I asked. I'm better than I've been in years, she said, and I believed her. Priya was already there when we arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a laptop open and a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. She stood when she saw us, and I was so relieved to see her familiar face that I had to stop for a moment in the doorway. She ordered tea for grandmother and sat across from us with her hands flat on the table and her eyes moving quickly between our faces. "Show me everything," she said. I laid the contents of the envelope on the table. Priya put on her reading glasses and went through each document methodically, not rushing. When she reached the deed, she was quiet for a long time. "Dorothy Voss," she said. "That's the name on the deed." "Yes," grandmother said. "Do you have any other identification under this name? Anything that establishes continuity between Dorothy Voss and who you are today?" Grandmother reached into her purse and produced a worn card. It was a Social Security card, original issue, with Dorothy Ann Voss printed across it in old typeface. Priya looked at it. Then she sat back. "All right," she said. "Here's what your brother doesn't know. The property transfer he's been trying to get you to sign is meaningless without the underlying deed, and the underlying deed is in a name your family has no claim to. Even if your grandmother had signed that paper tonight, it would have been legally unenforceable the moment someone looked at the title history." She paused. "Which means Crane knows this. Meridian knows this. The transfer isn't about getting legal rights to the house. It's about getting your grandmother to sign something that they can use as a show of consent, to muddy the waters if anyone challenges them later." The diner was nearly empty. A couple in a far booth, a man at the counter. Outside, the parking lot was still. I checked my phone. 3 texts from Nathan. I didn't open them. "What do they actually want?" I asked. Priya tapped the research abstract. "If Werner Voss's compound was what this document describes, and if any portion of the original research data is still protected by intellectual property law, the rights would have passed to his heirs. Meaning your grandmother, meaning eventually you." She looked at grandmother. "Meridian has been sitting on a suppressed version of this research for 60 years. They've been developing a synthetic approximation, slowly, carefully, in a way that distances it from the original Voss work. But if the original documentation surfaces in a legal proceeding, their patent becomes challengeable." Grandmother's hands were steady around her tea. "Werner knew they would do this," she said. "He said they would spend years making the work their own, and then dare anyone to prove otherwise." "He was right," Priya said. "But he also knew how to stop them, because he built in protections." She looked at the abstract again. "This research contains internal documentation markers, specific language and notation that would be nearly impossible to replicate accidentally. If someone compared this document to Meridian's current patent filings, the similarity would be damning." She looked up. "Dorothy, did your father keep any copies elsewhere? Anything with another witness, another lawyer, another institution?" Grandmother was quiet for a moment. "Margaret Osei," she said. "Werner's research assistant. She has copies of his original lab notebooks. She's been keeping them for 67 years. Priya wrote down the name immediately. "Can she testify?" "She's 93, I said. "Can she testify?" Priya asked again. Grandmother almost smiled. "Margaret Osei could testify in the middle of a hurricane," she said. "She is the sharpest woman I have ever known." My phone buzzed again. Not Nathan this time. An unknown number. I turned the screen toward Priya. She read the message without touching the phone. "Mrs. Hale, I think there has been some misunderstanding this evening. I'd like the opportunity to speak with you directly. I'm only trying to ensure your family is protected. R.C. Crane." He had grandmother's number, which meant Nathan had given it to him. Priya looked at grandmother. "Has he contacted you before?" "Once," she said. "After his first visit." I didn't respond. "Good. Don't respond now either." Priya closed her laptop and began organizing the documents carefully. "I'm filing an emergency injunction first thing tomorrow morning to freeze any attempt to transfer or claim the property. Once that's on record, it triggers a title review, and the Dorothy Voss deed becomes part of the official proceeding. At that point, Meridian can't touch anything without going through a federal process." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Priya looked at me over her glasses. "I need to ask you something." Okay. Why didn't you call someone sooner? When Nathan first started pressuring her about the house, I looked at the table. The familiar answer was already forming in my throat, the one I had given myself a dozen times. He's family. It's complicated. I don't want to make things worse. Maybe I'm overreacting. Because I thought maybe he was right, I said. About me overreacting. About making things harder than they needed to be. He's been telling me that my whole life, and sometimes I still believe him. Priya took off her glasses. You are the only person in this situation who has been acting in your grandmother's actual interest, she said. That's not overreaction. That's the only sane response to what your family has been doing. Grandmother reached over and put her hand on mine. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. We stayed in the diner until midnight. Priya made calls and sent emails and built a folder on her laptop of everything she needed for the morning filing. I texted Nathan once to say grandmother was safe and we would talk tomorrow, and I turned off my notifications. At some point, a car pulled slowly through the parking lot. Gray sedan. I recognized the headlights. He's outside, I said quietly. Priya looked up, looked at the window, looked back down at her laptop. Let him sit there, she said. He can't do anything. The moment he walks through that door, he's on camera, approaching a woman he's been contacting without her consent, in a diner, at midnight. That's its own kind of evidence. The car sat in the lot for maybe 10 minutes. Then it left. Grandmother watched it go. He's not done, she said. No, Priya agreed. He isn't. But then neither are we. We drove to a hotel 20 minutes from town. Priya had booked 2 rooms under her name. I helped grandmother upstairs and settled her in, and she held my hand for a moment before I turned to go. Your great-grandfather would have been so glad, she said. He never knew I existed, I said again softly. No, she said. But he knew someone like you would come. That's why he made it a door that needed someone to open it, not just a secret that needed someone to find it. She looked at me with the same quiet resolve I had seen at the dinner table. The expression I now understood was not resignation but certainty. The research wasn't hidden to be destroyed or sold or turned into someone's profit. It was waiting. For the right hands. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought about Werner Voss, a man who had died on a road he drove every day, who had been careful enough to hide his work inside a mirror and trust it to a daughter he was trying to protect. I thought about my grandmother carrying that weight for 67 years. I thought about how many times I had sat in that house and looked at that mirror and seen nothing but my own reflection. In the morning, Priya filed the injunction. The judge granted it by 10 a.m., which she said was unusually fast but not surprising given the documentation. Nathan called me 4 times before noon. I let the first 3 go to voicemail. On the 4th I picked up. Where is she? He said. Mom is worried sick. She's safe, I said. She's with me. Claire. This has gone completely off the rails. Crane is a legitimate researcher. He's not. I know what Meridian is, I said. And I know what the deed says. And I know that the property transfer you've been trying to get signed is based on a legal fiction that collapses the moment anyone looks at the title history. A pause. Did you know that? Or did Crane not tell you that part? The silence on his end was different from his usual silences. It was the silence of someone recalculating. He said it was a formality, Nathan said finally, and his voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. It wasn't, I said. You were being used. He needed a family member to initiate the transfer request so it would look voluntary. He needed your name, not Grandma's. That's why he came to you first. Another silence. Then, what happens now? Priya has filed an injunction. There will be a formal title review. The research documents are going to a legal archive today, and Margaret Osei in Columbus has already agreed to provide her copies of the original lab notebooks as supplemental evidence. I paused. Meridian's patent attorneys are going to have a very uncomfortable few months. And Grandma's house? Stays where it belongs, I said, with the person whose name is on the deed. That afternoon we drove to Columbus. Margaret Osei lived in a small house near the university, surrounded by plants and books and 40 years of organized files. She opened the door before we knocked, as if she had been watching for us. And when she saw my grandmother, she made a sound that was not quite a word and pulled her close. They stood in the doorway for a long time. I waited on the porch and looked at the bare November trees and felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't known was unsettled. It was not happiness exactly, and it was not relief. It was more like the feeling of something returning to the shape it was always supposed to have. Inside, over tea, Margaret Osei laid out her copies of Werner's lab notebooks on the kitchen table with the careful reverence of a person who has been keeping a promise for longer than most people are alive. She had organized them, annotated them, cross-referenced them against published research from the past 6 decades. She had spent her retirement building the case she had always known someone would eventually need. "I have been waiting," she said simply, "for one of you to come." Priya photographed everything. I read pages of Werner Voss's handwriting and thought about the compound he had believed in, the patients he had imagined, the morning he got in his car and drove toward a road he would not come back from. I thought about what it meant to build something not for the present but for a future you could only imagine, trusting that the right person would find it. The legal process took months. There were hearings and depositions, and a period of 3 weeks, when Meridian's attorneys tried to argue that the original research was too old and too undocumented to support a viable intellectual property claim, and Priya dismantled that argument with such systematic thoroughness that the opposing counsel asked for a recess that stretched into an entire afternoon. Nathan hired his own lawyer eventually and then, slowly, quietly, began cooperating with Priya instead. I don't know what he thought about during those months. We didn't talk much. But at one of the hearings he sat beside me in the gallery, and at the end of it he said, without looking at me, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't answer. I didn't forgive him yet either. Some things take the time they take. My grandmother sat in the courtroom on the day the judgment came down with her hands folded and her back straight, and that expression on her face, the one I now understood completely, the one that had nothing to do with waiting and everything to do with knowing. The judge read the findings aloud. The Voss deed was valid. The Meridian patents were referred for a federal review of their origin documentation. Richard Crane was named in a separate civil filing for fraudulent misrepresentation. The house on Maple Street, in the name of Dorothy Ann Voss, remained exactly where it had always been. Grandmother didn't cry. She reached over and took my hand and held it with that same surprising grip, the one I hadn't expected the first time and had come to rely on completely. Outside the courthouse, in the gray December light, she tilted her face up and closed her eyes for a moment. I stood beside her and didn't say anything. "He knew," she said finally. "What did he know?" "That it would work out," she said. "Werner always said that truth doesn't disappear. It just waits for someone patient enough to carry it." She opened her eyes. He was very patient. "So were you," I said. She looked at me. "So were you," she said back. We walked to the car. The city moved around us, ordinary and unhurried, indifferent to the 60-year wait that had just been set down on a courtroom floor in a building nobody was paying attention to. That's how it is with justice, I think. It rarely arrives with noise. It arrives like a key turning in a lock, like a panel swinging open in the back of an old mirror, like a whisper in a quiet room that changes everything. On the drive home, Grandmother fell asleep in the passenger seat, her head tilted slightly toward the window, her hands relaxed in her lap. I drove, and I thought about Werner Voss building a hiding place inside a carved wood frame. I thought about the daughter who carried it for a lifetime. I thought about what it means to protect something true when everyone around you has decided that something false is more convenient. I thought about my own reflection in that mirror, all those years, all the things I had been looking at without seeing. When we got home, she made tea, and we sat at the kitchen table, and she told me more about her father, the real stories, the ones she had kept locked away for decades. She talked for 2 hours. I listened to every word. The mirror still hangs in her bedroom. The panel in the back is empty now, but some evenings, when the light is right, I look at it from the doorway and I still feel it. That particular quality of old wood and older truth. The sense that some things are built to last, not because they are strong, but because someone loved them enough to protect them until the world was finally ready. That was enough. That was everything.